Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new edition of Naviar Virtual. And today I have here with me Simon McCorry. Hi, Simon. It's good to have you here with us today.
Hi, Marco. Yeah, lovely to speak with you again.
Me and Simon, we go quite a long way back. We released one of his albums, Songlines, back in 2018. And Simon also participated in a couple of events that we hosted in London. One in 2018 and the other one in 2019. The one in 2019 also happened to be our latest physical events.
Yeah. I do remember it rained a lot, and I remember
Yeah.
having to take equipment back to my van and just because my van also broke down. Because
yeah, exactly. I remember. Wow.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That was...
yeah, that was quite a day. Quite a day.
Yeah. Very dramatic.
So as usual, today we're going to ask a few questions to Simon, who prepared a live set we will be listening to later on. And the first question for you is the question that I always ask artists who participate in Naviar Virtual. So what's your story? Can you tell me a little bit about your music background, how you started making music, and what are you up to today as well?
Well, music. I mean, it's kind of funny because my attraction to music was kind of an accident, because it started with my sister. I mean, I keep on telling this story, but it's true. My sister had like a present of an old shoebox tape recorder, and I was very jealous of this, and I just loved the fact I could record things. I mean, I had no concept. I mean, I would have been of music making object sound or found sound. I just liked the idea. I would have been 6 or 7. And yeah, I was jealous of that. Anyway, when I went to primary school, the teacher said, hands up who can play the recorder. So I ended up playing like the recorder, a plastic flute thing. And because of that, all the kids who played the recorder had a chance to get free music lessons. And I wanted to play the trumpet. My mum said I couldn't play the trumpet because we lived in a tiny flat and the neighbors were already at us for making too much noise. And she thought the trumpet would be too noisy. And so she chose the cello for me, and I didn't even know what a cello was. So that's how I started, and I loved it. So that's how I started sort of into, that kind of the music thing. So, I mean, the recording, obviously, the thing with the tape and being able to tape things was something, it was kind of really important to me, and I probably didn't, so I went through this music thing. I got awards as a young cellist to get free lessons, and at that time there was a place, I think it still exists in a different format, in London, called the Centre for Young Musicians. And you go there every Saturday, get lessons, have music theory, sing, do chamber ensembles, small orchestra, and that kind of stuff. And then there were these orchestras for the London schools. And I could sort of continue that and did a sort of preliminary course at Morley College to music college. But I ended up going to university and studying maths and physics and then philosophy. The recording thing didn't really come back, music and electronics, until my early 20s. And that was, I was playing bass guitar I played bass guitar in a band, and one of the guitarists lent me a 4-track in Yamaha. I can't remember what number it was. Had 6 channels, but recorded 4 tracks, tape player, and an Alesis reverb, small micro verb. What's the other thing? A compressor, again, Alesis nano compressor. Or micro compressor, I can't remember which, but they're kind of boxes, third of a 19-inch Eurorack unit. And I started kind of making music by feeding the mixing desk back on itself and using the EQ on it, which was basic, just high and low shelf on the Yamaha. desk, the Yamaha on the 4-track, to change the feedback tones and stuff like that. And I record tapes backwards and stuff like that. So I started experimenting just because it was kind of fun. That was kind of early 90s. And one part the thing of the kind of rave scene, warehouse party thing I really loved was actually the chill out rooms. And I just thought that was a really interesting space for experimental music. So that's kind of how I kind of got back into. Oh, the other thing I got lent as well, which was very cool, was a Roland Juno 106. So the keyboardist lent me this, and then he sold it 2 years later to someone else. So it all went. But that was, to work with a synthesizer, really lovely synthesizer, was a lot of fun. And then I came back to playing the cello after kind of doing the band thing as bass guitarist, and that was very, very militantly, I guess, acoustic. I worked with a percussionist who played, traditional percussion like conga bongos, wood blocks and stuff, but he also made homemade instruments out of gas canisters, keys. He would just make all sorts of stuff. He was a fantastic musician. It taught me a lot about sound. He had this kind of thing, there's no bad sound, there's just a sound in the wrong place. And that was the kind of thing he taught me. So yeah, and that was kind of like, that was improvised, but it was very structured improvised. It was expressionistic, probably modern classical not in the kind of way it's used now, but in a very kind of 20th century way. Very atonal, quite abrasive. We worked first with a dancer, and then we started working with an actor, setting poetry and short stories to music. And we, it was like kind of a semi-theatre thing, and we sort of did that, toured that. I think the last major thing we did was for Resonance FM. Just as Resonance had started, they had this thing called they had this thing called Wynnum Tales, which we had, which is the Wynnum from Swift, the book Gulliver's Travels, the horse people, the intelligent horse people. But they had also gave us a slot to do a live performance in their studio there, which was like, I think was Henrietta Street, in West End of London. So we did a live performance, which was an hour-long thing, which was an adaptation of this book by this Antarctic explorer called Apsley Cherry Garrard, called The Worst Journey in the World, and the diaries of Robert Falcon Scott about his journey trying to get to the pole. I think he does get to the pole. Yeah, he does get to the pole, but he doesn't get there first because Anderson gets there first. But it was more that what was really interesting about the material for that was very dramatic. It was almost like a myth of mythic proportions. The other things we did were like stories by Edgar Allan Poe, some poetry by Ted Hughes, which was his Tales from Ovid, stuff like that. And, we performed theatres. We did Edinburgh Festival in 1998 at Presence, which was fun. It was a lot of fun. And so that was kind of that was that. And then I started getting back into electronics again, and it was, I think I always wanted to, because I had this thing, being woken up by using this Yamaha 4-track, in terms of just the possibilities of playing about with sound in an abstract way. Then, I started trying to acquire gear, I think the first synthesizer I bought, which was my own, was a Yamaha DX100 FM synth. I loved FM synthesis. And what was great about the DX100, and I think those early Yamaha synths is, they're a little diddy keyboard, but it could record SysX to a, I think I had a MMT8, I think that's what it's called, by who made those? Is that Alesis again? I can't remember the names. I know that Orbital used one. It's basically a sequencer. It would pick up SysX information on the fly, and the on the DX100, you could actually change the values of the operators and would record that information as SysEx MIDI live onto the MMT8, and that was amazing. So you sort of had you could really manipulate the sound and the parameters and program that. And what else I had? I had a JV1080, which was kind of fun but less interesting, which I had to sell. And so, but from that, I think then I kind of got the money together to get a computer and start using. I started off using Cubase and then moved to Logic. My first big thing actually was to do. I worked with an artist called Kieran Crowder who made these amazing, amazing paintings, which are sculptural. They're layered with they're oil paint layered with boat resin, and they're lattice work. And they kind of almost like landscapes. They're sort of layered and layered and layered and layered. The structure of the boat resin holding it all together. And there'd be fields of color. So like kind of, I guess, abstract expressionist painting, abstract, I suppose that's what you call it. My art terminology is very sadly lacking. But he wanted a soundscape for a exhibition he was putting on in Brixton in London, St Matthew's Church, which was used as was called Mass Nightclub. It was used as a nightclub, and he worked there as a bouncer occasionally. And he wanted this whole big event there. So his paintings it was all dark, he had this soundscape and a sound system there. His paintings would be strapped to railings and pillars, with very dark, with very narrow lighting. He would cut he employed bouncers to follow people around, so there were behavioral rules, so people weren't allowed to stop or sit down. So it was like a whole kind of installation thing. And I created a 3-hour soundscape for that, which was playing about with games of silence, playing about games of chaos, creating hints of order and breaking it down. His whole idea was he didn't want anyone to interpret the paintings, but to kind of meet them in a raw way. And so it was to juxtapose things in ways which feels that they give meaning, but then it moves on that somewhere else. So it was quite a disorientating experience. And yeah, so that was I suppose that was my kind of first starting into the idea of sound design and publicly doing electronic music. And then I kind of shifted, that was it. I shifted into working for theatre. I think from that I could work in theatre because I'd had this experience of defining space and sound, and then it made sense to me how to use sound to define a space within a piece of theatre. And again, my journey with those things has really been lucky, and I never was particularly a big fan of theatre or went to theatre, and I'm not really a big fan of theatre now for a few reasons, though I love working in it. And yeah, my route into it was through this actor I worked with, Oliver Senton. He had a friend who was a director, and that director took a chance on me. And it started off doing some kids' workshops in a school, Kidbrooke School in Southeast London. And then I did some theatre with him. One play which got very good reviews in the Times and the Guardian and a few other places. And that gave me enough to get more employment. Yeah, so that's my journey.
You basically just answered all the questions I was planning to ask you.
Oh no, sorry, I've done a soliloquy. Must be a conversation, I apologize.
Thank you very much for being here with us today, and let's listen to some music. No, I'm joking. But you actually, I'm gonna ask you a question about your experience working in theaters as well later on. But one of the things I wanted to ask you was about, well, you briefly mentioned it as well. Basically you started as a classical musician, so you started by playing the cello, and then slowly you started learning more and more about electronic music, and you started combining these things together. So nowadays, if someone looks at your discography or listens to your discography, they will find compositions, they will find albums that combine field recordings, ambient electronic soundscapes, and classical music as well. But not only that, but if we focus, there you have different albums. For example, I can think of Songlines. Songlines is mostly contemporary classical
Yeah,
release, the one you released on Naviar here
yeah,
a few years ago. But then you have other other albums that are completely different, that they focus more on the ambient electronic element. I'm thinking, for example, of Pieces of Mind or
yeah,
Nature by Nature.
yeah.
So I wanted to know how you managed to have uh, all these genres. How do they coexist in your music, and how do you what's your creative process? Do you actually think about it beforehand? Do you think, oh, today I want to make I want to work on an ambient album for the next few weeks, or I want to work on a classical
I
album?
I think it's yeah, I'm not very good. I'm not very good at planning. I mean, I guess it could be argued about some of my work. It's disparate. It kind of jumps in directions. I think like you mentioned Peace of Mind. I think for the few people who followed me were quite surprised by that, which is a good thing and a bad thing. I don't know. But the thing is, I think is like sort of publicly releasing music again, like with Naviar. It was something which happened after working for 17 years in theatre, to release work as a solo musician again, as an artist, not as a commissioned composer, was something I decided to do in 2017. Some things it kind of was in the back of my head for a long time, but I had really gone down the route of, if that's okay, I don't need to present my work. I'm quite happy using my work as a means of making a living and working in theatre or dance or circus sometimes. So I think one of the things that working in theatre taught me, and this is one of the things I owe working in theatre a lot, big time, is that you never think about genre. You think about what works for the play. And some of the most exciting things were cross genres. I mean, I did one of my first things was a play called I think what was it called, Ministry of Pleasure, which was set in kind of Restoration England with Charles II, about this kind of crazy character called Earl of Rochester, who was seen as a libertine of some sort. The truth about him is a bit more complicated, but someone had wrote this play about him called Ministry of Pleasure, so my job was to do that. We mixed, I listened to a lot of kind of English, I wouldn't recommend anyone else do this, but English Baroque. I mean, I don't mean the greats like Purcell, I mean some other figures, which sort of around that time of the late 17th century. And so I can listen to a lot of that. But I couldn't help but add like some kind of dub dancehall kind of thing in there, and use the melodica and things like that. It was just part of my nature, but it works. So in that scene, we had a court dance, which was I can't remember the name of the dance, but it was a kind of dance, which was a Baroque dance, and we segued this Baroque dance, which I wrote, into this kind of dancehall track. And it was just beautiful moment, because you had like these actors just doing this very, in costume, drama, kind of period costume, doing this very polite dance. And they continued to do it because the choreographer was clever. And then this music changes, and then it floats. They float because it's all in the same time, but the tempo's doubled, but then their movement becomes something floating on top of this other rhythm. And things like that. I mean, that's also interests me about contemporary dance, is because you don't think about rhythm, you think about images and how images work together. Mm-hmm. And that was the beautiful thing about working in theatre. So you think about juxtaposing things which you don't think should work, but they can. And in a sense, working now coming out and releasing as a artist in my own right is I will use those things, maybe not consciously, but it's there. In terms of my creative process, it becomes more and more about discovering how something wants to be. So I think if I set out to make something, if I'm going to set out to do an ambient track, it would not end up as an ambient track. So some of the things, say like a Nature and Nature title track on that album, was a bit of a crossover. It was a commission for as choreographer dancer Satoko Fukuda, and it was a game with using a dict. It started because I wanted to use a dictaphone. I don't know, to record the cello. I just thought it was a silly idea. And then you start playing about with it, and the cello started sounding like brass instruments because of the low quality microphone on the dictaphone. And when I started chopping it up, I used RX tools by Isotope to kind of just draw out little bits to create these weird, almost like radio-like rhythms, and create things a bit like sound like birdsong. And so it takes its own path. And say with that commission, I would have it's about, then I'm working with an image and I'm seeing how something I've created fits, or if it doesn't fit, or does the accident make new connections with the image. And that's also how I work with my music. It's trying to find, it takes lots of things and throw them up in the air and let them land, and find what patterns are there, and shift out the stuff which is not working, or tweak it and move it around a bit. And as I've done that more, I kind of feel, though I slightly lost my way with it a bit more recently, but for a while it really felt like a communication with material, and it felt like a communication with the materiality of the world and a communication with the world. And that really interested me as an artist, is that as artists, when we create and we don't impose ourselves on material, something else happens. And it's sort of about being sensitive and listening. And I don't know, and that was something which really interests me. I mean, I think sometimes I do impose myself, and sometimes when I do impose myself, it goes wrong, or it becomes artificial or contrived. So I think that's how things end up sounding, as if they're different genres or whatever. It's not necessarily it's planned. I think I have from working in theatre, I have a bank of ways of working lots of different genres. I also listen to lots of different music and enjoy lots of different types of music. So that, sort of, as we get older, they're all kind of stored in the kind of folds of our brain, I guess, in our memories, and they kind of regurgitate, and I guess. I create very pedestrian music when I try and be structured. So it's really more about trying to work with chaos to some degree. And I think I'm not alone in that. I think there's a whole load of us who, that's yes. How we respond.
Probably, yes. It's fascinating, really, because I never really thought about the difference. That I never thought that there was such a big difference between making music just for the sake of releasing an album, let's say, or creating a soundtrack, for example, because obviously you have when you create a soundtrack, my understanding of it, at least, is that there is a sort of an interaction between the visual aspect and what's happening. So like you said, it's like an interaction between the music and the reality and the surroundings. And for someone who has worked for 17 years and who created soundtrack for 17 years, in my mind, I think it must be difficult to just make music from scratch in a way, because if you make music all the time thinking about this interaction, and it's a kind of a, it's like when people participate in the haiku challenge, for example, and they make music based on the haiku. It's a very it's a very open call, and people are free to reinterpret it in many different ways. But at the same time, there is a sort of a guideline.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Whereas when you sit down and you make music on your own, you don't have that. It's just you and
Yeah.
in your mind.
I think that's true. I think that you're absolutely. I think that's yeah. You're absolutely right. And I think, again, I don't think I'm alone in this. I create rules if I'm doing my own music. I mean, to be honest, a lot of things I discover are from commission work, and I explore them further because I like them. So the rules may be, so like with my solo projects, I mean, it's branched out a bit. It started off, it was to make music which I could perform on the cello.
Mm-hmm.
And then that creates something defined, which is a bit like the defined thing of working to a haiku or working to a piece of theatre.
Mm-hmm.
One of the differences I would say, and there is a danger of this for the role of it's probably a role of other creators within theatre. There is a danger of creating what I would call cardboard cutout music. One is because of the length of time to make something is so short, mm-hmm. that after a while, I actually felt frustrated because I felt I was making things which were two-dimensional. They performed their role very well within the play, but actually they would not stand up as a piece of music. And I did find that frustrating. Mm. And also, I think that's true of film music. You listen to lots of film music, it doesn't stand up by itself. Maybe you like it because you like the film, or you've liked it in the context of the film, but you listen to it by itself. I think there are a few very notable exceptions, but they are very, very few. And I don't think that's the fault of the composer or the people making music. It's the nature that it is about the image and the image and music and sound and actors, the sets, mm-hmm. The whole thing working together. And there's something beautiful about that.
And what are those exceptions?
I don't know. I'll probably put my foot in it now. I think there's some clear ones. I mean, I think someone like Shostakovich, who was a film composer and an incredible composer. So, I mean, I couldn't name you. There is film music of his, like The Gadfly or something like this, which I don't think I've ever seen the film, but I know the music. And Benjamin Britten did the same, but more kind of public information films, funnily enough. There's Walton, Henry V is a great piece of music. I mean, some people love him. It's not necessarily my favorite composer. Later on, I kind of rate, I mean, it's not all the music, but I do rate John Williams. He does have there's a kind of depth to what he does. There is also the period, and I think, Ravi Shankar writing music for, is that Ray's first, what's the name of Apu, the film Apu, the Apu trilogy. That's a fantastic score. I mean, of course, it's been proved because Ravi Shankar became, big and important cultural figure worldwide. But I think that's more to do with those individual composers than. Mm-hmm. I think also, I mean, I haven't listened to it out of context, but Hilda Gunnarsdottir's soundtrack to Chernobyl was fantastic. Mm-hmm. Thought it was a really extraordinary piece of work.
Yes.
And I think it's extraordinary because it's on many levels, but one, it's very sparse, but it really brings home how sound design and music are actually really one thing. And the way she's created that, it becomes part of the sound design. It becomes part of the environment. Yes. It becomes almost diegetic sound. Mm-hmm. So I think she's, that's quite fantastic. That's I'm thinking of something I've seen recently, which has affected me. To be fair, I have not listened to it without the image, but I think it's probably so strong it will stand up. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's others, but generally, I think, I don't know. I mean, people haven't seen it yet, so I can't comment. But talking about Hans Zimmer's soundtrack to Dune, there's been lots of criticism about it. Hans Zimmer has Hans Zimmer tricks, and what he does is amazing. What he did for that kind of the new Blade Runner, he
Yes.
really emulated Vangelis and the original Blade Runner score.
Yes.
Does it stand up as a? I don't think so. I think you listen to it by itself, it would be kind of quiet. It'll sound like film music.
Yeah, I don't know. It sounds beautiful when you actually watch the movie, but I don't know if it would be if I would be able to listen to it on its own.
No, it needs. I mean, of course, it has to create space for the image, and that's one of the things of writing music for theatre. You have to and theatre has some stricter things than film. You can get away more with film because everyone's mic'd up, sometimes on theatre, but not really. Also, you have this thing of the sound of the actors and the sound coming over speakers, unless it's live instruments. But then that's another problem. It confuses the ear, and also there's so many other sounds going on in a theatre in terms of lighting and air conditioning and all this stuff. It's all that paraphernalia. It gets annoying for a lot of sound designers. The sound of haze, kind of smoke coming on stage, or sound of dimmer racks from lighting are very noisy. They even get into the circuitry of the sound. It's all these things. But one of the main things is that you've got people are speaking, you've got sound design coming over speakers. They're two different sources, and it's really hard to blend together. Sound from a speaker is never as lively as sound actually from an acoustic instrument.
Yes.
There's a kind of parameter for that. I can't remember what it's called. I should know that, being a sound designer. And then you have to create space for the voice, and that means not getting rid of in the way of articulations or sibilants, and so you can't have rhythmic things. It's very complicated, and also you need to create a frequency space for the voice. So using low tones and high tones helps. So you sort of parameters you have to work with, and that's the same as sound design. If you want to use, I hate naturalistic sound design generally, and as a sound designer, I tend to try and push a director away from that, because I always think that's the better way of doing things in an abstract way or a musical way. Is something like rain. The director wants rain. You put rain. It's in the background, and then they go, no, it's too loud. Bring it down, and then it's just a background hiss. Then it's like, doesn't sound like rain. It just sounds like a bad radio or something.
Yeah, white noise.
It's just white noise, because that's, of course, that's what rain is, unless you hear the articulation of individual raindrops. That's a really good example of something not working. That's why it's always better to find other ways. So there's kind of, whereas with a film, you've got control of the recorded voice. Therefore you've got a way of bearing it into the. So yeah, that's what I mean. You have to create. So that's why. But even still, even you have to create space. You have to create space for emotions as well. And I think there's a term I heard. I maybe called Mickey Mousing. So a lot of early music took its idea from opera. So it really tells a story very, very well. You like motives and very, very detailed, but actually it works very good in cartoons, but it gets really busy for a film. So you have you get and I think what actors, especially I hear actors say back to me, is that they don't like it if it's defining, especially in theatre. You get this because obviously it's happening while they're acting. They feel that it's leading them, and they can't change their performance. And for them to make a performance interesting, it has to be new every time. They have to find new nuances. So it's really important to create space and ambiguity.
Of course.
I think. Sorry, that was a long answer again, but yeah.
It's okay. No,
I think
it was super interesting.
I think that'd be. I think that's that you got so their parameters. I think creating one's own music, it's about creating parameters, and creating parameters helps. It's just not that I don't believe in manifestos, but manifestos help create things because you limit yourself.
Yes.
We limit ourselves. There are less choices. Having less choice makes things easier.
Yeah, they serve as a guideline.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, we have another 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask you another couple of questions. I would like to know a little bit about your future projects, if you have something coming up, or if you. I know that you just released an album, and I just want to know if there is also something else that we can
Yeah,
look forward to.
yeah, there is. There's another album quite soon as well, on White Lab Rex, which is um, much more classical in a way. I mean, it has some very sound pieces, but it's much more classical. It's piano. It's and it's very stripped back. It's less some of the cello stuff. It's very close, quite raw.
Mhm.
I'm very proud of that. I think emotionally, it's a very strong piece of work. And it's also, it's got. I'm really lucky to get this great pianist, Simeon Walker, to perform on the pieces for me. So that's very cool. It's just solo piano piece he recorded for me. And I don't know if I hope it happens, but there was a plan to go to Japan to work with Satoko again. And there is, I have some funding from Daiwa Foundation to help me go there to develop a piece with her called In the Middle of Nowhere, which actually is one of the tracks on the album which has just been released. So they're my plans for.
Fantastic. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Still, just maybe it's to be 2023 or 2024. We don't know, but hopefully 2022.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
And my last question is about the live set that we will be listening to now. I would like you, if you want, I would like you to introduce it to the audience. And I know, well, as some of you already know, we've been collaborating with audio modeling for quite a while, and Simon has been using their software for quite a while. So I wanted to know whether you're going to be using it in this live set, or and if you did, what's your experience in general with audio modeling products?
I think it's very good as for what it does. It's very narrow as physical modeling, and that's if you've got. I mean, I use 3 instruments in the set, so I use a contrabassoon, a bassoon, and a bass flute. I love the idea of using contrabassoon, a bass flute, because they're quite hard instruments to get hold of, and they're quite hard instruments to get that musician who owns one to record. So they're very good at specific tasks. So that the bass flute's very good at being a bass flute, and it's very playable. You can what I've done with them all is I've detuned them so they're not in temperament. I've pushed this stuff to do with their breath and the formants, so they're kind of becoming a little bit more maybe having though I'm not using flute, I'm using bass flute, have a quality of maybe a bamboo flute or like a shakuhachi or something like this. So you get that kind of rawer, rougher texture, which they're very good at. And what I found with them when I use an foot controller, expression controller, is they're very responsive. To be able to change the texture of a single note. So I'll be using them very, very slow in this piece. This piece starts off, it's atonal, it's already detuned. Each individual note is detuned in the scale. It's atonal. It uses an idea which I've used for a long time of asynchronous loops. So there will be a phrase and which is looped, and there'll be another phrase which I play which is looped, and they never meet. I think I use 3 phrases like this. So what happens, that tones cycle around each other, interact in different ways, and create dissonances in different ways. And hopefully those dissonances create other colors just because of their dissonance. I've tried to keep the sound of the audio modeling because it makes no sense to software like this to pile on effects with it, because its quality really is how it represents those instruments, and it does in a way that you'll never get from a sample library. Solo instruments are really hard with sample libraries, aren't they? So I use a bit of, I will mix that with a bit of very simple modular, again kind of based around sine tones, a little bit of frequency modulation, to create another kind of texture which goes with those, again atonal and microtonal, atonal and microtonal. There are some objects in there as well. There's a kitchen bowl, maybe another few things, and maybe, depends how, as I perform it, there may be some cello, I don't know. But we'll see as we go along. Though I did have planned, I'm going to not do it because I snapped strings. I did plan to use the electric guitar and feed it through a ring modulator. Found some interesting things with that, but I didn't find it. I didn't find strings in time to do that. So
that's okay.
So that's it. It's quite dark and evolving. I mean, it's dark and dark. I mean, I find it quite meditative, but it's on the darker side of maybe ambient. But is it ambient? I don't know. It is what it is. Yeah.
We'll have to find out in a few minutes. You got me really curious now.
Yeah, I got myself curious.
All right, Simon. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
It was great to see you after so long.
Yeah, after 2 years. Oh, yeah, really good. Really lovely to see you.
Yeah. And now we're going to be listening to some of your music.
Thank you.